In this section, we would examine the trajectories of development that have occurred in the climate change negotiations at the global level. In the Framework Convention, as discussed in the previous section, responsibilities of reductions in the GHGs, or the greenhouse gases, were fixed on Annex 1 countries, but the details as to how it has to be accomplished and how much of responsibility each of these industrialized countries were not clearly and in great detail worked out. So, how to implement? What are the modalities of working it out? And who would shoulder how much of responsibility were not very clear. And the Framework Convention made it apt and clear that it is a conference of parties through a series of meetings and deliberations were able to work out the modalities of the same. 1992, this was the position. Between 1992 and 1997, a lot of activities took place. It almost looks like a kind of a drama being enacted at the international level. That when somebody is accused of a wrong and to take certain responsibilities, the one who is under an obligation coming up with several excuses or simply asking as to how I shall actually perform whatever that has been imposed upon me. In a very sophisticated way, this has been worked out in these international negotiations. And we shall look to the run-up to that concretization of an arrangement, a workable plan, and its implementation in this particular section. Kyoto Protocol, the developments between 1992 to 2012. Having committed themselves to this obligation, the developed nations were under an obligation to reduce. But then how do I reduce? We have not worked out the details of it. And so they wanted to buy time. In all fairness to them, it must be said, the details, since they were not worked out, let this conference of parties work out the modalities. Till then, we continue with our business as usual model. And the developing countries on the other side, since they did not have any obligations to comply or commit to, all the obligations were there on the developed ones. They wanted to get the best of the bargain. Let these guys come up with a package whereby we will be able to access new technology, cleaner technology at no cost to us, and also develop like them. And while these details are being worked out, we will continue with our motto of continuing to develop with whatever technology that's available with us. It was a virtual tug of war. Each one wants to take the best of the bargain in the entire arrangement. But it is not just a drama that was being played out. It was actually the question of quantification. If the reduction has to come to a pre-1990 position, how much? How much of the concentration of GHGs in actual weight we have to reduce? Who should reduce how much? How does it pan out globally is one question. And the first question was answered this way. The emission reduction, although we referred to about half a dozen greenhouse gases, GHGs, we reduce it into, for our purpose of management, quantification and reduction of this, translating it in the form of carbon dioxide equivalent. So everything was reduced to CO2 equivalent, CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalent. That was the first thing. Then they had to work out how much one is due to reduce. Look at the position. As far as the United States is concerned, there was no problem. They had to reduce by 33%. Yes, As on 1992, the position was the contribution of United States to the concentration of GHGs was almost one-third of the entire globe, and so that reduced by 33%. As far as US is concerned, we do not have problem with regard to their percentage. But what about Soviet Union? That which was Soviet Union has now broken into 15 independent countries. The Soviet Union totally had 19% of the carbon pie to reduce. And so the question was, how would we reduce? How much the Soviet Republic or the Soviet Union to Russia Republic would have, and had accounted for more than half of the required reductions. So that needed to be worked out. There is also the case of the European Union. The European Union is a conglomerate of several of these Western developed countries, which are also in the Annex 1 group. And we would like to be treated as one block of the European economic entity. And together we undertake this responsibility, and amongst us we will divide as to how much one has to work it out, leave it to us, but allocate our share. So this has to be internationally done. So this was one question, and that was still being worked out. And ultimately they decided that Soviet Union, having been succeeded to by Russia, as it happened in the United Nations, in deciding on the permanent member of United Nations, from Soviet Union, it became the Russian Republic as a permanent member of United Nations. Same thing here also, that you will take the majority of that 19% pie of reduction, and we apply a particular formula for the European Union, which has been internally agreed within the regional entity as to how much each of the member shares would be, but each one would take responsibility. And unfortunately, some of these countries like Sweden and others, their emissions were so low that it did not contribute to global warming at all. But being member of the European Union, they had to take up the responsibility along with those who were actually contributing to the greenhouse gases like Germany and France and others. And so the European Union had one particular share worked out. So the details took a little while. Actually, it took 5 long years before a protocol with all the details of who is responsible, how much, and within what time one has to really accomplish the mission that has been tasked for them to achieve. The protocol, as it was inaugurated in Japan, in a place called Kyoto, it's called the Kyoto Protocol on Climate Change, and it adopted a very convenient model. Convenient model, convenient for those developed countries, because there was a lot of dispute and disagreements as to which model we have to adopt. When you talk of reduction, can we wholesale reduce it? Can we think of different mechanisms whereby we will be able to achieve it? We need certain concessions. The industrial lobby is not in favor of gross reduction all of a sudden. So you need to work it out over a period of time by offering several options as to how we do it. And 3 options were worked out as to how this reduction of those carbon pie from the global emissions to a pre-1990 position would be arrived at. And this was what was referred to as the market mechanism, because the industry and the business houses understand only the market mechanisms of incentives, of concessions, of reward, and certain holidays, tax holidays, and things like that. So some of these needed to be adopted here, and 3 certain modalities were worked out. They are called as the market mechanisms for emission reductions. So from something which was a non-negotiable thing, that you have to reduce so much. If you are United States, you have to reduce by 33%, was supposed to be that was fixed and committed to and accepted by United States. Through this particular mechanism, they started coming up with certain mechanisms which were actually diluting the very effect of it. But in practical terms, this is the only way we have to move forward. Otherwise, there would not be an agreement. And entire international law is dependent on consensus of states, and this was how the consensus was arrived at. The first one was something called as the joint implementation. The Annex 1 and Annex B countries, which form the Annex 1 countries, which had the obligation to reduce, they would get into a carbon cooperation. What is this carbon cooperation? That some of them are not having that advanced technology as their leaders. And so there has to be a lot of give and take. Like, for example, to give a simple example, if state A, which has the technical capacity to reduce its carbon concentration to even beyond the quota that has been assigned to it. So if it has to reduce by 10 tons, and if it can reduce by 12 tons, then what it would do, it would get into an arrangement with another member of this Annex 1 group, which is not that well advanced technologically, which also has, say, for example, 10 tons to reduce of carbon concentration, but it can only manage 8 with the technology that's available with it. These are 2 extra tons that it has to make up for the shortfall. It has to have cooperation with this technology transfer, upscaling of technology, monitoring facility to be provided one by those who are better off. And through this cooperation, together, they would be able to ensure that this 10 plus 10 of 20 tons of carbon reduction they would be able to achieve together by exchange, together by cooperation, together by the upscaling of technology of one, together with the monitoring by one who has that ability and partnership with the other one. This is the first formula. The second formula was a very interesting one, which is referred to as emission trading. That means between the two developed countries, one country has the technology and it's able to transfer the technology to the other one which does not have that technology, and that transfer of cleaner technology by them to the other developed country would have to be quantified in terms of the carbon reduction. Say, for example, a particular kind of clean technology, when it's transferred by state A to state B, 1 ton of carbon equivalent of that would be worked out for the transfer. So that means I can transfer, I can trade emissions. And for trading emissions, I'm going to get the technology. So thereby, a mechanism that was worked out among the developed nations, if I, a state A, will have to reduce by 10 tons, and another state which has to reduce by equal quantity of 10 tons, then the shortfall of 1 or 2 tons would be supplied by me in the form of I taking additional load from him, and to that extent, between us, he spews 12 tons into the atmosphere, I spew only 8 tons. Between us, we have worked out the average under the law of averages 20 tons, and that is what you require both of us to accomplish. So, having allowed the other one to surrender his extra tons of carbon, you have to give a credit to them, carbon credit, emission trading. So, allowed to trade on emissions, and thereby you will be able to work it out. It's a kind of a book adjustment. And another kind of book adjustment came in the third formula. It's called as transfer of clean development mechanism. One of the obligations for the developed nations was that they have to transfer the technology, the know-how, and provide financial assistance to the developing and underdeveloped nations. And provide those additional capacity building exercises so that they will also develop clean technology, and so through this clean technology they also develop, and for that they got into a bargain. Okay, we will transfer this much of technology to you, and for that we need something in return. And what is that? That to that extent it should be quantified in terms of carbon reductions. So supposing I have to reduce my carbon emissions by 10 tons as a developed nation, I will transfer some of those modern technology to state C, D, E, and F, which are developing nations or less developed nations, and cumulatively that would amount to, if you scientifically work it out, half a ton of carbon. Okay, so that means I continue to have 10.5 tons of carbon concentrated into the atmosphere by me, but that half a ton extra would be made up through this transfer of clean technology to these nations, and thereby I fulfill my requirement. 10.5 minus half a ton. Half a ton for the transfer of clean development mechanism for giving financial assistance. So thereby it's a kind of a trade-off. You sell your carbon coupon and thereby you get a credit, and thereby you continue with your business activity with the same contribution that you have made, but you have made up for that with the assistance that you are providing in terms of technology transfer, in terms of financial assistance. Looks a little weird, looks a most unconvincing way of getting into an arrangement, but this was how it was worked out, for the simple reason the developed nations were not ready to accept anything different from this particular formula. They applied the law of averages as the only practical solution. Of course, overall, the commitment to reduce to 5% below 1990 level remained, and this we are going to accomplish. We talk of means and ends. Means should also be as good as the end that you want to achieve. But here, by hook or crook, we shall be able to achieve. That appeared to be the message emerging out of the Kyoto Protocol. So the formula that was worked out in the Kyoto Protocol had the market mechanisms put in place whereby you apply the law of averages. And in order to create that financial spine in those developing countries to adopt to this new technology, to internalize this new technology, and for which additional resources are required, there has to be a contribution for the developed nations, and for that it was decided primarily 2% of certified emission reductions were to be issued for projects under clean development mechanism. So a mechanism is going to be worked out, and for which a particular body called as the Clean Development Mechanism Fund, and this fund shall be put into application by a particular entity that has been created in association with the World Bank. It shall be able to work out the modalities of funding projects. Funding projects where in developing and underdeveloped countries, funding projects for promoting clean development. So in the process of development, industries that are coming up there that promote cleaner technology, they would be encouraged to get established, and for that technical know-how and the funds that are made up are to be made available would be supplied through this adaptation fund, and that's how we are going to put this into operation. The commitment for implementation of this entire program and these formulae was to be worked out in 15 years time. So by 2012 the mission of the Kyoto Protocol should be accomplished, that what has been given in the Framework Convention reduced to the position prior to that of 1990 would be accomplished, and that we had to do it before 2012, and that is the commitment period. Supposing if any of these developed countries, the Annex 1 countries or the industrialized countries, If they were not able to meet that emission targets, then they are required to make up for the difference between the targeted emissions and actual emissions. So 10 tons I could reduce only 9 tons. So what is this 1 ton that I'm going to do? This obligation remains with me. But how do I clear it? The year is 2012 already. What shall I do? Well, in that event, we will get an additional time. And that's called as the second commitment period. And during that period, you need have to clear those dues, the ecological debt, along with a penalty amount of 30% in the subsequent commitment period starting from 2012. So this was something that was worked out. The developed nations were happy because their market ploy has worked. The developing nations were happy because to adopt to the clean technology, they did not have to spend anything from their kitty because they had no resources, and these resources would flow from the developed countries. So it was a win-win situation for both, they thought, and they put this into application. That's what they decided. So the formula that was worked out was such that there was a lot of dilution in what had committed, but this was the only formula that was possible. And there was another hitch. The hitch was if the protocol is to come into force, it should get the subscription or the approval or what is referred to as the ratification of not less than 55 countries. So 55 countries should ratify them. And in these 55 countries, you should have at least those many countries which cumulatively have contributed to at least 55% of global emissions of 1990. Very difficult task. That means what? Over 50% of the emissions that are there with only two countries, like United States and the Russian Federation. 33% for United States and Russian Federation, something around 19%. That means these two accounted for more than 50. If either of them play truant, then this will not come into effect at all. Even if you put the entire globe, 190 odd countries coming together, it won't come into effect. As it so turned out, United States, which appeared to be cooperative all the while when this Kyoto Protocol formula was being worked out, it started singing a different tune. It said that this is too much of a burden. We alone cannot take this much of responsibility, so we will drop out of it. And not only it remained non-cooperative, it created roadblocks for the implementation of it. And so, till around 2005, the Kyoto Protocol becoming a reality was a difficult task. But luckily, after a lot of negotiations, after a lot of give and take at the political level, the backroom diplomatic ploys that were worked out, the Russian Federation ratified it in 2004 toward the end of that, giving the much needed breather for the protocol to see the light of the day. Finally, a total of 192 parties ratified it with more than 55% of carbon emissions satisfied, and so the entire program could come into effect even when United States did not cooperate. But the problem was it took so long, more than a decade, for this particular formula to work. And remember, the formula to come into work needed 15 years time from 1997 to 2012. And in order to work out the details, the CDM mechanism, for example, right from 2005 onwards, when they started working it out, it took a while. And so, till the end of 2007, they were still working out the modalities of implementation of the Kyoto Protocol. So, in effect, it was only from the beginning of 2008 up to the end of 2012, this Kyoto Protocol would be in full operation in just 5 years' time. And this made the target an impossible dream to realize. United States had already left, and China was developing at such a pace that even it was outstripping United States in carbon emissions. But China, being a developing country, it had no obligations. It had only a right to get the clean development mechanism projects cleared. Along with India, it got the maximum number of projects to implement with no obligations to reduce. So even the modest targets, with all the dilutions that occurred in the Kyoto Protocol, became very difficult to realize, and it did not make any qualitative or quantitative change at the end of the year 2012. The real greater irony was even the modest emission targets were not achieved by the developed countries. Forget about developing countries keeping pace with them. Even those developed countries that committed did not achieve whatever they had agreed to achieve. So the position around 2012 was very bleak. Climate negotiations was at a break point. So much of work being done, but in terms of result, very little to show to the world. But still, the conference of parties were meeting one after another, year after year, and luckily, in two such conference of parties, in both Durban in 2012 and in Doha in 2012, there was a general consensus that we should at least try our best to make things work. And we want to extend the Kyoto Commitment up to 2020 and evolve a new agreement by Paris Conference of Parties in 2015. So when we come in another 4 years, we will come up with a new agreement to replace this Kyoto Protocol. Till then, let it work so that let it achieve some progress, and then we will tighten the screws of working out the Kyoto Protocol and come up with a far more rational, far more transparent system to take the place of the Kyoto Protocol. And we will learn from our mistakes of the past, and we will have a think tank called the Durban Platform, which would work out the details of the modalities of a new agreement to come into existence in the year 2050. And this new agreement will take the place of the Kyoto Protocol, and through that, we will accomplish the mission. That was how it was decided. So, the Kyoto Protocol, as you could see, there was a lot of hot air about it. There was so much of claims made, so much of political grandstanding, and even United States made a belated return, but it did not really assure anything. And having not assured anything, it did not come up with any clear commitment, but it agreed to work with others, cooperate with them to come up with a new deal to be brought into effect in Paris in the year 2015. And that was how the arrangements ended. In 2012, Kyoto had a very poor record to show in terms of achievements, but some progress made, 10 steps taken forward, 20 steps we moved backward. Some of the developing countries started emitting more, and so a new arrangement had to be worked out. There was no consensus, and it was at that churning we moved to the next phase of the evolution of the climate negotiations, leading to the Paris Agreement of 2015. That will be the discussion in the next section.